Cool. First of all, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, I want to thank Satish and Sarat to have this environment and give me the opportunity to talk about something which will helps everyone, and let's see how it will go. Excuse me if I do any mistakes or some hiccups and all these things in there, but I'll try my best to contribute to the group and see how it will go. So let me share my screen. So the session will have typically two parts, so which we can say. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Uday, I'm able to.
Okay. So the topic for today's session is relationship between user story, task or subtask, and acceptance criteria. I think we all work in different agile environments, different organizations, so they may have a different perspective of defining all these things and working in their own way. So first of all, I'll go through some typical questions, and then we'll start the discussion on those topics. And probably at the end, by the end of the session, we'll come out of with some positives on the topics and the relationship which I understand between these three things, which will typically help a Scrum Master or a developer or a team member in the organization to be more agile and move towards more agile processes. So if I ask you a very basic question, why organizations prefer agile over waterfall? Any answers? Anything? Anyone?
Yes, Uday, this is Parul. Basically, when there are requirements are not very much clear, or I would say, so in that case, organization uses agile.
Okay. Anyone else?
So Uday, Ramya here. What I feel is that when we use agile, we get a chance to continuously adapt and reflect on what we do, rather than in waterfall. In waterfall, I think it is not the case. It is usually you get to evaluate or validate your tasks output only in the end of your delivery. So in agile, that's not the case. So in each and every sprint, you get to understand, are we doing it correctly, or we need to do some changes into it. So that gives an edge for the client, and also it is helpful for the teams to work on with the continuously evolving requirements.
Perfect. I think that's the correct definition as everyone understand in there. So why organizations prefer agile? Because they want to be more predictable. They want the teams to be more predictable, because in waterfall, once we deliver the project, there's no chance of improvement. But in agile, we want to be more predictable day by day in terms of the delivery, in terms of the velocity, in terms of the outcome of the team. And if there is any gaps, we can correct them in a smaller cycle. So yeah. And we all know what's a user story. So it's a small statement or a definition which will deliver some value to the business or to the product owner or the organization, which we all understand. Anyone understand user story in a different way? Anyone want to add that as an what's a user story for a team?
Hi, this is Karunakar. User story like that is a simple statement for the user requirement or application feature.
Okay, yeah. So it's different for different people, and there are different hierarchies on there. But a typical user story is something which is going to give a business value once it gets delivered to any specific environment. That can be pre-production, production, UAT, or whatever the definition of that defined in there. So once I'll just take an example, a simple example, which will lead us to the topic which we want to discuss about. So if I say In a 2-week sprint, a developer started working on a user story, which is estimated as 8 story point. And what I'm assuming here is that 1 story point is 1 day of work. Okay. So what's the team's responsibility before picking up that story in the sprint? Any answers on that? Any suggestion? Any understanding on that? That what's the team's responsibility before they pick that user story in the current sprint?
Okay, so the team has to verify if there are any dependencies, dependencies in the sense any upward dependencies that is that could be waiting for some from some other team. That is one thing. The next could be some risks of not being able to complete it, and the complexity of the task in delivering it.
Okay, yeah, good pointers. Anyone else? Okay, so if I say we need to define the acceptance criteria clearly before picking up that story. It's not a good practice to pick a story until unless the acceptance criteria and the definition of done is defined. In some organization, in some places, the definition of done may not be user story specific. It may be on the release specific or a sprint specific, that's the definition of done. But we should have the acceptance criteria for each story before we start working on the story in that particular sprint. Is it correct? Or anyone have any other thoughts on that? Okay, so that's what I'm trying to communicate. So it's not an individual responsibility, it's a team responsibility to define the acceptance criteria, or before pulling up that story in the sprint, make sure that the acceptance criteria is defined in the story and the team understand that what we need to deliver as part of that story. And the next question will come, that story may be picked up by a developer or a couple of developers. What's the developer responsibility during this sprint? So one responsibility is, say, they need to deliver the sprint. But is it okay if they start on day 1 and they deliver the story on day 10 or day 8 and they will not give any update during the time? Or is something which we understand, or we ask people to provide the update on daily basis? What, anyone wants to add something on that?
Could they prioritize to see in that user story what's the relevant, like applying that the Moscow analysis, like if it's something that they must have or should have, could have, or couldn't have right now. You know what I mean? I mean, yes, the stakeholder could be like they want all of it right now, but just prioritizing it to see if in that user story if what they could, if it's something that's relevant to that, like they should work on what, as you said, the definition of done, but or you know.
Okay, got it. But I think in this case, what we're assuming 2 things. One thing is that the story is ready to pick up that sprint. So that means the Moscow or the prioritization is already being discussed upon, and we all agree as a team that, yeah, this story is ready to pick up in the sprint.
Get it.
It's a developer responsibility to deliver that story. But my question is that what's the good practice for a developer? So yes, we understand it that the developer needs to deliver the story by end of that sprint, which is 2-week sprint. But is it okay if you don't ask any specific questions to that particular developer about the progress, about the blocker during that 2 weeks time? Is it okay, or is something Agile tell us or suggest us that, yeah, you need to do this on daily basis to understand that
Yes,
by end of this sprint, we should not be in a situation where we blocking other stories, or we are not delivering that particular story. Yeah, go on.
Uday, so for that, I think it's a best practice to create subtasks for each story. So For example, if the developer is, developing on the story, it could be that it could have some tasks of how many components he's developing, and then there could be some testing tasks. There could be the unit testing. What are the tasks that are, a part of that to complete the user story? We can add that as a subtask, and whenever there's some blockers, we can have it discussed on based on the subtask level. So we can have a track on how many subtasks are getting closed throughout the sprint. And if there's a blocker, we can understand that so there's something blocked at the middle of the sprint because of certain subtask.
Yeah, good answer. So I think
So to add on, Uday, like Scrum talks about transparency, inspection, and adaptation, right? So from that perspective, it is not we as a Scrum Master or coach or whatever role we are playing need not be asking the status or the progress of the story to the team. Instead, the team should be maintaining a transparency among themselves to see, are we on track to achieve the sprint goal? And what could be the issues, challenges, how we can achieve the sprint goal? From that perspective, yes, the 3 values of Scrum will be coming into context.
Yeah. So I took that example intentionally of 8 story point because if the developer is not, there may be a different, because I come from a developer background, so I understand their pain and their problems on day-to-day basis. So it's very difficult and very frictional conversation in the team that why I need to provide the updates on a daily basis. I picked up the story and then I can deliver it in 2 weeks sprint. Why are you asking me that these minute details or the other details in there? Because every organization or every team in a different phase of agile. Okay, so it's always a good practice that first we understand that the story has the acceptance criteria, and as the lady mentioned that we should. It's a good practice to have the subtask or task defined in that particular story. So when we pick that story, in case there is some blocker, in case there is some progress, in case the developer is not available during that particular time, then someone else can pick that up and see where it was, what all things have been done for that particular story, and we can pick up in there. So because what we want to do is we want to be more predictive and transparent on not on the delivery perspective, but on each story perspective also, because that's going to be clubbed, because otherwise it will be a smaller waterfall. So we'll start on day 1, we finish on day 10 and say that we don't know what's happening between day 1 and day 10. So it's always good to have the task written in the particular tool, whatever you're using. You may be using Jira or Excel or whatever you're using. It's always better to have those subtasks created in the sprint for that particular story and see how it's being progressed. Is there any dependency? Because there may be another possibility which we'll discuss later in detail about that. Maybe 2 developer, 3 developer can work together on a particular story based on the task if they are totally independent of each other. Let's discuss about that further. Before that, we'll just try to go on the acceptance criteria a little bit. So any thoughts on the acceptance criteria, how we define acceptance criteria and what is the acceptance criteria for a particular story? Thoughts? Okay. So acceptance criteria is something which we understand that when we deliver that story, these criteria may be checked or validated before accepting that story. That's what's called acceptance criteria. We define them clearly in advance that yes, if these 5 things completed properly, then only we can mark this story as completed or done. These acceptance criteria can have multiple stakeholders, maybe some technical acceptance criteria, maybe something which is related to the audits like technical debt and audit reports, or what you can say sonar reports and all these things in there. But mainly those were for business users, where they define that what I want to achieve in this story in detail as part of the acceptance criteria. I'll give you an example just to give you a different perspective of what we understand as acceptance criteria. So here I took an example, how we define a story as a basic user story, that as a user role, I want to do some action so that I will get benefit out of that. So I took a typical example. So we all understand this user role action and benefit thing, or anyone have any questions on this user story way of writing the user story or defining a user story? I think it's a typical way how we define the user story. Okay. So as a user, as a new Facebook user, I want to register to the application so that I can connect to my friends. So we have a user role, which is a Facebook user, which is a new Facebook user. What action he want to do? He want to register to the application, and what benefit he's gonna do and get out of that is he's gonna connect to his friends based on his registration to that. So what we define is we define 3 acceptance criteria. Once the developer says that the user story is ready, we're going to validate these 3 acceptance criteria against the delivery and see is it ready to accept, or there are any feedbacks, gaps, or something which we need to rework on. That can be a defect, that can be a new requirement altogether, or something which need a further discussion. So if I say we have 3 acceptance criteria here, that UI should be aligned with other pages. Just take an example. Facebook already have few pages in there. So the UI should be from the skinning perspective, from the font perspective, the UI should be alignment, because in the story, it's not defined that what type of UI it will be. Someone may create something which is totally a different design altogether, a different color coding altogether. So it's always good we write that as an acceptance criteria, that the alignment of the UI should be like the other pages. It should not be from a different world altogether. Then the second part, acceptance criteria, comes as registration form should give an error or duplicate email data. So if someone is trying to register it again, the form should have the validation that, yeah, you are trying to register again, and it should validate with the data which is already stored in the system and give the respective errors. And the third acceptance criteria is that user information should be stored. So we should store the user story, user information which is provided by the new Facebook user. So before we start the sprint, we need to check in this particular story that we understand the user story, that what we need to deliver corresponding to the acceptance criteria, that yes, we need to fulfill these 3 criteria. So at the end of the sprint, that will be acceptable by the product owner or whoever the stakeholders are. Let's take an example. If one of these criteria not fulfilled, let's say the UI is not aligned with other pages, the product owner may create some defects and say, yo, no, this is not correct. If the data is not being saved properly, they can say no. The backend guys will say, no, I have not received the data because you have entered some details in there and the details are not saved in there. So these things should be validated in the review session, in a detailed review session, that is the story is accepted or not accepted. Then let's talk about what's a task respective to the user story. So as someone mentioned earlier, the task is something which is a small part of the work which the developer is going to do to achieve the business objective of that particular story. So anyone wants to add something on this question? What is a task for a user story? Anyone which will help other people also? Okay, so if I say this, is it correct? The task is a technical activity to achieve the functionality, which is a user story. Because the task is mainly for the developer, it may not make some sense to the product owner or to the business user. It's something which the developer needs to commit to and say, yes, I need to develop this to achieve this. So in this example, let's say based on these 3 acceptance criteria, which is the UI, the email data validation and the data storage, the developer go into the user story and say, I'm going to create a task which says create a new database table to store user information. Then you're going to create another task, says create a user interface or form to collect user information, because one of the requirement is that user going to register it. So once you create a form on the front end, then only it will be achievable. Then he's going to write an API to validate the duplicate email IDs or other validation data. So these are the tasks which a developer is going to create to make sure that we are not missing anything or we are not overlooking anything which will block a story to deliver by end of this sprint. So it's always a good practice that after the planning session or during the planning session, the developers talk to each other, try to understand it, and whoever going to work on that particular story, write those tasks in detail in case that story is of something which is as per their estimate of more than 2 days of work or 1 day of work, because there's a certain guidelines that you should be having a task with a certain period of time. You should not have a task which going to run for 5 days or 7 days. That doesn't make sense, or that's not going to benefit anyone. We also need to create some tasks which may not be a direct benefit for the user or the product owner. Here I mentioned one thing called document update, because that may not be directly part of the acceptance criteria, but it may be part of the definition of done. So when we say definition of done, it may be followed by in the organization that your story will be or your release will be only accepted once you write down all the instruction in the README file, or once you complete all the audit reports, sonar reports, or anything which is unit testing report or something. So it's always good that we should write those. We should encourage developers to write those small things as part of their user story and the task, so we will not miss them when we're developing it, or it will not come as a defect or a problem at later point of time. Any questions here? Cool. If I say, yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question which is not directly related to your discussion, but I have been facing a bit of confusion in this question. Is it mandatory to have a parent story associated with every task, or can a task be handled as a separate entity, in fact, sorry?
Totally depend upon how comfortable your team is, because in Jira, if you say one of the key things which I always face and I always suggest the people is, especially in the agile world, or no matter which project management process you're following in there, we need to correct our nomenclature. When I say nomenclature, there are people who call a issue as a defect, a bug, a ticket. They all are talking about the same thing, but they're using the different word. So
Yes.
in organization, if you say task, if the task is being tracked properly to come to a graceful end or delivery, there's no harm in there.
Okay.
But you need to make sure that someone will create a task and forget about it, and after 2, 3 sprints, 4 sprints, it says, no, we haven't tracked that task. So if you have a process where you can track your task on regular basis, you can create them. And if you're going to provide them, there's another problem with this process also. Generally, we create a task and we don't provide them weightage. When I say weightage, the estimate, the task is going to consume someone's time.
Yes.
So estimated it, because some organization says that this is a task, we're not going to put some story point in there, we're not going to bill for that, or we're not going to get money for that in there. So we just create a task, but it's going to take someone's time, it's going to consume someone's time. So make sure you track, if you have a process to track that as a task to end from creation to the successful acceptance. And if you put an estimation to that, if it is going to consume someone's time, I think it's always good to have those two things in the system, and you can create it as a small story or parent story or a task separately.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Let's say let me go to back to that slide. We have these 3 criteria, and based on that, we have defined these 5 tasks in there. And let's say when we define, when we were defining our story, the user says, no, I need to have this also as part of the acceptance criteria. You need to think one point here, that it's not mentioned in the user story. In the user story, the definition is very simple, that I, as a Facebook user, I want to register to the application so that I can connect to the friend. But as an acceptance criteria, the product owner wants a successful registration email as well. So based on the acceptance criteria, the estimation will be impacted. Correct? Yes or no? Any thoughts? Because if
Yes.
you back in, yeah.
Yeah, with acceptance criteria, the estimation will be actually impacted on the basis of the acceptance criteria. If there are numerous acceptance criteria and the complexity of those acceptance criteria is basically complex, so the estimation will be high.
Correct. So that's why I mentioned when I started the session that together to make sure we understand what the product owner wants. And is my net okay? Okay. So it's a team's responsibility to make sure that the product owner and the team understand that what we're gonna get out of that particular story. And that's not just the user story, but also validating the respective acceptance criteria. Because with each acceptance criteria, we're gonna have an amount of work which gonna consume someone's time and which will impact the overall delivery of the user story and the release also. So just take an example. If I add this acceptance criteria also in those 3 acceptance criteria, will there be any impact on the task? Yes, there will be impact on the task. And for this particular task, I think it may be different thought by anyone else also, that we need to have additional of these 3 tasks, because we need to define a template which gonna trigger when the successful registration completed, and we need to make sure that the SMTP server or any particular server is configured to send an email. So you can understand, by adding one more acceptance criteria, the amount of work is being increased exponentially. So while estimating a user story, we need to encourage the team as a Scrum Master or a product owner that yes, please focus not just on the user story, but also what are the definition of done and the acceptance criteria for that particular user story, because that's gonna impact your delivery and your validation at the end of the sprint. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna add 3 more tasks to the same story. So now we have 8 tasks instead of 5 tasks for the particular story. And if you see this, I have tagged these tasks with the acceptance criteria. So if you remember this acceptance criteria, the 3rd acceptance criteria is to store the database, to store the user information in the database. So our first task is helping us to achieve 3rd acceptance criteria. Our second task is help us to achieve 1st, 3rd, 2nd, and 3rd acceptance criteria. So we can, it is not always mandatory that every task needs to be linked to acceptance criteria or needs to be attached to acceptance criteria, but it's always good to have that thing, so developer or the development team understand that what all we need to deliver as part of this particular story. Questions? Okay, I think it's going too much technical, or I'm going too fast. Enough. Okay, so here are a few guidelines because generally what we do is that the benefit of creating a task is these are the smaller activities which help us to track the story for the full duration of the sprint. So on day one, if you go by the task, we have roughly 8 tasks, and if we estimate the story as an 8 story point which we discussed, and we have 8 days to work on that. Typically, one can work on that particular story for on a particular task for a day, and then say the second day he may be comfortable, he or she may be comfortable giving that update that yes, I created the table structure where we store the user information. So we're gonna go through task by task during the sprint and see, yes, we are going in the right direction. If there are any blocker, just take an example of the SFTP configuration. If we need to have any firewall configuration which needs to be removed for that particular SMTP configuration, then we know in advance that yeah, this task may not be completed because we have a dependency on that. So we can talk to other people, we can talk to other teams to expedite that thing. And as a Scrum Master, we can help the team to identify the respective POCs and to see how these things will go move forward, and we'll try to resolve that as early as possible. Okay, so when I say guidelines, it's always good to have a task which can be completed between 2 to 5 hours. So if you say a typical day work in 8 hours working time there, we generally have 1 or 2 hours of meeting with multiple Scrum ceremonies and all other things in there. So 6 hours are productive developer work. So if we create some tasks which can be completed within 5 hours or so, then it's always good that on the second day we'll be ready to complete that task and start a new task. It's always suggested to have the sequential manner because these are the developer activities. There may be few tasks which may be totally independent. Someone else can work on that particular story if someone is not available. But it's always recommended that you can have sequential tasks. You can go one by one and see, yeah, this is completed, now we can go and that. Generally, people struggle like when they move from one organization, one team to another team and say, no, this team was not doing that bit, and some people take on leave on other things in there. So it's always recommended if the particular developer keep updating the story, so user or the product owner or the stakeholders will get that update on regular basis that yeah, we are progressing on this bit in there, and if there is any particular blocker or dependency, they can easily see, because there are few stakeholders which may not be attending your stand-up, want to be informed, they want to be that information. So it's always good to say that yeah, we are working on this story, this is the particular status, and this is how we're going to move it forward, and these are the other things. Questions? Okay, so this is all about my session. I'm happy to answer any questions or anything which maybe for this topic or any off topic. We still have roughly 15 minutes to have that conversation. Let me see in case someone have any questions in chat. Okay, so I think this is the question which we already answered. Okay. So what's the question?
Uday, we try to answer the questions on the chat to the possible extent, and a couple of them they asked the participants asked live during the session as well.
Yes, I think so. So that's good. Thank you, Satish, on that. But I didn't check the chat earlier. So anyone, any questions, anything you want to talk about, discuss about? Cool then. I think, yeah. So Satish, you can get the feedback. Yes.
Sure. Thanks, Uday. First of all, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And I shared the link of the feedback form in the chat link. You can start sharing your feedback and what you felt like, how you want us to improve upcoming sessions. So we can start doing that. And in case any of you want to be the speaker for any upcoming sessions, you can reach out to me or Sharat, and you can drop an email, or how to reach out to us on the WhatsApp, Telegram groups. Yes, so you can reach out to us. And now we have the floor open for the feedback. And again, it is all total anonymous feedback. So you can share the feedback and yes. Uday, there's a question on the product owner role in the story, the acceptance criteria, or the user story writing technique.
Sorry, I didn't get the question. What was that?
The question on the role of product owner from the user story acceptance criteria perspective.
So what I understand from my experience, there are multiple people who took the role of product owner without having the proper understanding of the product or the process. Okay. So where the Scrum Master's responsibility is more important, because he's the person who's going to guide the team and the product owner that, yeah, this is the right way, or this should be the way by which we're going to get more productive or more value out of the team. So as we all know that, let me ask this question: who all can write a user story? Anyone can answer this question?
Product owner can write, maybe the developers can help the product owner to write.
The technical architect also sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Yes, if it is a technical story, yes, technical architect, or even the team also can help.
Correct.
So as a normal practice of Agile also, anyone in the organization is free to write a user story. It may not be part of the team, it may be part of the team, it may be outside the world, it may be someone as a guest. They can write a user story, give suggestions. So user story is nothing as a feedback. They can come from an external vendor also, and they would provide a feedback. Yeah, I need to get this feature or this something there. But at the end, it's product owner responsibility with the help of team and Scrum Master to groom that story to be ready to pick up in any sprint. That's called backlog grooming. So yeah, when the user story is there, when they do the backlog grooming as part of their session, whatever time they find it, and whenever they find it, one of us talk about the estimation technique, or it's the priority techniques where we talk about Moscow. Then the product owner will go through that particular user story and see, is it rightly understandable for the team and developer or not? And team is going to help the product owner that, yeah, we don't understand it. Then the product owner responsibility come into the picture to explain that what we want to achieve as part of this particular user story. And then they all can together write the acceptance criteria, because as we see in this current example, there's a simple statement that a new user want to register it, but where the email come into the picture, because that's a vision, that's a thought, that's a understanding of the product owner that, no, I understand that someone wants to register it, but that's going to make the product more valuable if I send them an valid invalid email. If I tell them in advance that this email is already registered, or this date of birth format is not correct, this date is not correct. So that's the product owner vision, and that's why it's called a product owner. He owns the product to make it more user friendly and valuable to the organization. So then the product owner can write a user story in a specific format, which is generally we define that who's the action, what was the benefit out of that, and the team is going to help to understand what are the acceptance criteria, so they can deliver that in. So in that they can find lots of user story writing techniques, but the end objective should be after that particular session, before it's come to the particular sprint, that the user story is fully understood by the developers team or the development team with the acceptance criteria, because there may be something which may not be achievable based on, just taking today's example, we say that it's not possible because the SMTP is not configured in the system. So we need to remove that acceptance criteria from the user story, because that's an organization level decision that they want to enable the SMTP or not. So it's something which the product owner decide that yes, I want this feature, I want this particular acceptance criteria, and the team understand and deliver. But yeah, anyone can write the user story, and it's product owner responsibility, ownership to see that the story is deliverable and it's delivered in time. Hope I'm able to answer that question.
Yeah. So one thing just to add on, Uday, like when we mention anyone can write or define the user story, we need to make sure the team is doing a horizontal slicing, but not the vertical slicing of the stories.
Yeah.
And that comes to the responsibility of the Scrum Master to ensure both the product owner as well as the team is focusing on defining or slicing the stories in the horizontal form.
Right.
Any more questions? We could see the feedback coming up. Thanks for the feedback. And yes, if we don't have any questions, that's it for today's session, and looking forward for future sessions. Anyone can become speaker, so yes, you can bring up your own topic. We're happy to host you and have the session. Before wrapping up, thanks Uday for taking your time and coming up with this today's session, and thanks for each and every participant to make this interactive session. We will share the recording of the session by tomorrow.
Thank you, Satish. Thanks for.
Thank you, Satish. Thanks, Uday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Uday.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Good to have you, Bye-bye.
And